The whole thing turns on one word. He calls it a retirement community. She calls it a nursing home. He has brochures and a tour booked and a genuinely reasonable set of arguments about safety. She has a single sentence, delivered flat, which is that people who go into those places die. And in that argument, before a single crime has been committed, before any of the plot that people remember this show for, The Sopranos has already laid out the trap that millions of people are standing in right now. There is a parent who cannot be left alone. There is a child who has to do something about it. And there is no available action that will not be received as an attack. I want to talk about the first season of this show as what it actually is, underneath the guns, a very precise, very cold-eyed study of what happens when you take responsibility for a parent who will punish you for taking it. Start with why he has to act at all, because the show is cure here. Livia is not fine. She's leaving things on the stove. She's burning food. She's driving when she shouldn't be, and eventually she puts a friend in the hospital with the car. These are not the complaints of an impatient son looking for an excuse. They are the specific, unglamorous, entirely typical warning signs that tell a family the situation has changed and is not going to change back. And notice that not one of these incidents produces a decision. That's the true part. In real families, the crisis never arrives as a crisis. It arrives as a series of small emergencies that each get absorbed, explained away, patched over, until somebody finally says the thing out loud, and the moment they say it, they become the villain of the story. Tony says it. Everything that follows is the bill for saying it. Now, the detail that makes this show smarter than almost anything else on the subject. Green Grove is nice. This is a deliberate choice, and it should not be glossed over. The obvious version of this story is a grim facility, a bad son offloading his mother into a corridor that smells of disinfectant, and a clear moral verdict. The show refuses. Green Grove is presented as a genuinely pleasant place, good food, activities. A captain's table. It is expensive and he pays for it without blinking. By removing the bad option, the show removes every escape route from the argument. You cannot resolve this scene by deciding the facility is the problem. The care is good. The care was never the point. Because what Livia objects to isn't the standard of the accommodation. It's the fact of having been moved at all. And specifically, that being moved means her son made a decision about her, instead of continuing to organize his entire life around not making one. Which brings us to how she fights. Because her method is the most useful thing in this entire show, and almost nobody names it correctly. Livia Soprano never states a position. Watch the scenes. She does not say, "I refuse. I'm angry with you. I want you to feel guilty." She says two words, "Poor you," and lets them do the work. She reports a small disaster and declines all help with it. She takes a gift, examines it, and finds the one detail that makes it an insult. She mentions apropos of nothing, a woman down the street whose children abandoned her, and then says she isn't talking about anybody in particular. Nothing she says can be quoted back at her. Every single thing she says lands. That's not an accident of personality. It's a technique. And it's a technique that only works on people who care what she thinks. This is why arguing with someone like this is impossible in a way that's hard to explain to outsiders. There is no proposition to disagree with. You cannot defend yourself against an implication, and if you finally lose patience and respond to what was actually meant rather than what was actually said, you have now shouted at an old woman who said nothing, and everyone in the room saw you do it. She wins by never picking up the weapon she keeps hitting you with. Then the siblings arrive, and the show makes a second observation that I think is even less commonly said out loud. There are 3 children. Barbara lives at a distance and stays largely out of it, and Barbara is, notably, the only one of the 3 who seems basically okay. Janice comes back, full of concern, full of language about healing and family and doing what's right, and within a very short time it becomes clear that she is conducting an inventory. The house, the records, what's owed to her. Her caregiving is a position she takes rather than work she does. And Tony, who pays for everything, visits, arranges, absorbs the phone calls, and takes the decision nobody else would take, is the one his mother hates. That's the pattern, and it is close to universal. The child who does the caring is the child who gets resented, because they're the one who is physically present when reality has to be acknowledged. The ones who visit twice a year get to arrive as guests, be delighted over, dispense opinions about how it should be handled, and leave. Distance is protective. Proximity is expensive. Nobody warns you that the person who does the most will be remembered as the one who did the worst. Now the question the show refuses to answer, and is right to refuse: is she ill or is she cruel? Tony asks this constantly, in different words, for 2 seasons. Melfi gives him a framework, a personality structure, a woman who may be genuinely unable to feel joy or love, someone whose behavior is a condition rather than a series of choices. It's offered as relief. It doesn't relieve anything, because the diagnosis is not the problem. Even if it's completely accurate, it doesn't tell him what to do on Tuesday. It doesn't tell him whether to keep visiting. It doesn't tell him whether the woman on the phone is suffering or performing, and it certainly doesn't tell him how much of what she says he's allowed to stop taking seriously. Every family in this position wants the same thing: a clean line between the person and the illness, so they know what to forgive and what to resent. The line does not exist. People with dementia are still themselves. Cruel people also get sick. The confusion is not a failure of understanding on your part. It is the actual condition of the situation, and you will be making decisions inside it with no answer for years. The Sopranos knows this, which is why it never grants Tony the clarity. He goes to his grave not knowing, and so will most people watching, and then the show takes it as far as it can possibly go. Because Livia, in Green Grove, does not simply sulk. She finds the one man in that building with power, her brother-in-law, who is already suspicious and already wounded, and she feeds him. She mentions things. She raises concerns. She tells him her son is seeing a psychiatrist and lets him work out what that might mean. She never once says the word. She never issues an instruction, and her son ends up with people trying to kill him. That's her. Method escalated to its logical endpoint. She arranges an outcome entirely out of implications, and there is not one sentence anyone could hold her to. When Tony finally hears the recording, the horror isn't that his mother wanted him dead. It's that she managed it without ever having to say so, which means he still can't confront her, which means she has won even here. And here's the detail that gives the whole thing its shape. Somewhere in the family history is a story Tony remembers about his mother threatening to smother her own children rather than let her husband move them away. Years later, he walks into a hospital room with a pillow in his hands. He doesn't do it. But the image is exact, and it's the show's clearest statement about what this kind of parenting transmits. She handed him that picture when he was a boy, and it was still loaded when he was 50. Now the objection, which is real. Livia had a genuinely terrible life. She was married to a violent criminal. She was frightened for years, raising 3 children in a house where the money came and went, and the police came around, in a generation and a culture where leaving was not something a woman did. She was not given options. Nobody ever asked her what she wanted. And by the time anyone might have, the answer had rotted. So isn't all of this just damage? Isn't the son who resents her simply failing to understand what she survived? I think that's true, and I think it changes less than people want it to. Explanation is not obligation. You can understand precisely why a person became this. You can hold the whole history sympathetically in detail, and it still does not follow that you are required to stand there and absorb it for the rest of their life. Those are 2 separate questions, and families constantly collapse them into one, which is how people end up spending a decade paying a debt that was never actually theirs. The show doesn't ask you to stop feeling sorry for Livia. It asks you to notice that feeling sorry for her has never once made her easier to help, which brings us to the wake and the reason this essay has to end there. When she finally dies, the family gathers, and someone tries to run the standard ritual. Everyone shares a warm memory, and the room cannot do it. People start stories, and the stories curdle halfway through. The nice anecdotes turn out, on inspection, to be about something unkind. There is a long, excruciating silence where the eulogy is supposed to be. That silence is the most honest thing about grief this show ever filmed, and it isn't grief for a person, it's grief for a conversation. Because what Tony has actually lost is not his mother. He didn't have his mother. What he's lost is the possibility, held quietly for 40 years, through every visit and every phone call and every argument about a retirement community, that one day she was going to say the thing. That there would be a moment near the end when she was soft and grateful, and she would tell him he'd been a good son. That is what he was showing up for. Not her company. The chance. And the chance is gone now. And it turns out it was never really on the table, and the specific pain of that is not something the people around him have a word for. They think he's mourning a mother. He's mourning an outcome that stopped being possible somewhere around 1962. So if you're currently visiting someone who makes you feel worse every time you go, and you can't work out why you keep going, that's why. You're not going for the visit. You're going because you can't yet accept that the conversation you're waiting for is not coming. Tony Soprano waited for it his entire life. The show is very clear about how that turns out, and very clear that he could have stopped, and equally clear that no one in that position ever does.